What's cracking, everybody? Rose here, bringing you some Pokemon Go Battle League content. In today's video, we're going to be going over the Master League Premier Classic Cup, a meta that is so much dang fun, and we've got a bunch of new updates to the meta this season that actually affect this cup, so let's talk about it. We're going to dive right into the meta here, starting with the dragons. All the Pokemon on this page are essentially the eligible dragons that you may actually see in the cup. On the top, going to be Dragonite with that superpower buff this season, able to not only fight back against most of those steals that originally caused so much of a problem, but just the consistency of Dragon Breath / Dragon Tail and Dragon Claw are just absolutely just so meta defining in something like this that it's able to hit against basically everything that's not a fairy. So Dragonite, we don't need to talk so much about it because you already know, but essentially it's got a large amount of move sets. It's got a large move set, right? It can learn a lot of different moves. Typically you're going to want to run it with Dragon Claw superpower, but if you want to get, kind of spicy, you could run it with Draco Meteor, Outrage, maybe a purified one with Return. If you really hate fairies, you could try running Hurricane, but most of the time you'd barely get to it anyway. But, some of its key wins and losses, right? So the losses are essentially going to be the Togekiss, the Florges, the fairies, right? And then Electivire has Ice Punch, which is why it's listed here. Salamence probably just outdamages the Dragonite. And then Metagross here, because it doesn't take super effective damage from the superpower as a closing move, it is going to be able to Bullet Punch and Meteor Mash down the Dragonite without being able to be taken out. So it's still a solid counter, even though it's a Steel type. But some of the other issues that Dragonite can now take care of, Snorlax is definitely one of the big ones. It could already kind of take care of things like Gyarados, if Gyarados is running Waterfall, I assume, in this scenario. Garchomp, Magnezone, Machamp, Magnezone actually is a new one because of superpower. So basically any steel that's not Metagross is going to be on the wins list most likely. Garchomp, though, I want to talk about because Garchomp has always been super solid in this meta, given that Earth Power and Dragon Tail damage makes it super consistent against everything that's not a fairy. Can two-shield through almost everything, to be honest, and the hardest losses that it has are going to be against those that basically have Garchomp goes down to 7. That's an interesting. I didn't think Dragonite would beat it quite so badly. Anyway, essentially what's going on here is that Garchomp is a ground type attacker and it's got Mud Shot in the Sims, so you typically would probably want to be better off running it with Dragon Tail or Earth Power. And then, Outrage is kind of not so necessary in that moveset because you already have the damage from the fast move, so you could probably just run Sand Tomb, Earth Power in that moveset. Otherwise, yeah, Earth Power, Outrage would be the way to go if you're going to run a Mud Shot variant. The Dragon Tail version has a much closer matchup with Gyarados and Dragonite, as I've played it quite plenty, as well as Mamoswine. Basically, everything that beats it aside from Togekiss is it's a really close, if not flipped matchup from the Mud Shot version. So, obviously, things like Magnezone and Metagross are going to be a little bit harder to take down because you don't have that ground type fast move. But honestly, it's fine. The Dragon Tail damage is really enough, and getting to those nukes is just absolutely devastating. Plus, Sand Tombs can really knock things down to a point where Dragon Tails or even if Resist are doing a ton of damage. So, we're going to talk about another new meta Pokemon in this cup. It's going to be Kommo-o. So Kommo-o, once again, it just completely flops to fairies like most of the other dragons do, but it does have that close combat, able to hit back against the steals just like Dragonite does, but with a much harder hitting and stab charge move here. So you're going to be able to put a lot of pressure on things like Metagross, Mamoswine, some of the things that it really loses to. It has Dragon Claw and Dragon Tail as also a consistent damage output for its own stab dragon typing, which is really nice. So it's a little bit more on the spicy and less obtainable side, but if you've got one, it could definitely do a lot of work here as long as you can keep it off of a fairy type. So Hydreigon is the next thing on this list, and I'm mostly going through these in depth because they are newer to the game than something like Gyarados is. These dragons have all had some changes or been recently buffed in some way, like Hydreigon recently got its move Brutal Swing from the community day. It's still not going to be super meta, but Brutal Swing is a brilliant dark type move, and Flash Cannon is good for coverage, so it doesn't completely get walled by the fairies. If it can get to that Flash Cannon, it can still do some good damage. And then you've got basically losses to the things that beat the dark typing or the dragon types. So the things that should beat it still do. Snorlax landing that superpower. Dragonite could land Dragon Claw or superpower, honestly. Gyarados, the Dragon Tail probably, or the Dragon Tail / Dragon Breath damage probably outdo the damage coming from the Hydreigon because, you know, obviously Hydreigon doesn't it takes super effective damage from the incoming dragon damage from the Gyarados, and then Machamp just does super effective damage with fighting moves, so that's probably just, you know, what that is. But the wins that Hydreigon gets are kind of interesting. So you get like Swampert, Metagross is one of them. So Metagross is, you know, Hydreigon counters the Metagross because of the dark type move. Essentially one brutal swing will do so much damage to the point you could probably just farm the Metagross down at that point. Magnezone is kind of the same way, because if you can hit it with a brutal swing, it just does so much damage that it probably puts it into some sort of farm range. And yeah, I mean, even though it's steel, it doesn't matter. It's the brutal swing is still a huge hitting move for Hydreigon because it's such an attack weighted Pokemon. Haxorus is something now in this meta that we have known about for a while, but is now finally widely available after the last Go Fest and a half. So hopefully you were raiding for Axew and got a good one. Thankfully I had a lucky traded one that had really decent IVs that I've been using for the last couple of seasons. I love this thing. Haxorus is one of the best core breakers in the entire meta, only really having no play against fairy types because of the Night Slash counter and Dragon Claw moves, but it can hit back against Dragonite, can hit back even against Gyarados in some situations. Basically almost everything has to be somewhat afraid of Haxorus except for fairies. Like, that's essentially the only thing that you can really reliably counter Haxorus with. Otherwise everything is going to have to worry about, especially if it's got shield advantage. Watch out. Goodra comes up next here as another usable dragon, mostly just because it has Draco Meteor, able to, you know, do that giant nuke move if you need to, and having Power Whip to handle things like the Swampert, the Rhyperior, some of the grass, or not the grass, some things that help with the grass coverage, correct? Gyarados can still get hit somewhat hard about it, but against the, you know, the same thing. Goodra is not a very super reliable dragon because it doesn't have, you know, a spammy charge move. It doesn't have like a like Power Whip is not a good coverage move in this meta by any means, but the Draco Meteor, if you can land it, does tons of damage. So, you know, you got Metagross, Gyarados, typically the things that should be to Goodra do still. Charizard I threw in here because I needed something to put on the page. And it's a pseudo dragon, right? Like Gyarados, they both have Dragon Breath as a fast move, have, you know, Dragon Claw on the Charizard, Aqua Tail and Crunch on the Gyarados, and you could even run Outrage on the Gyarados if you wanted to as well. So those two can still fulfill a role of anti-dragon without being a dragon, and Blast Burn still hits things for a ton of damage, and then obviously Gyarados, just the Aqua Tail and Crunch moveset is spammy enough that it can be very dangerous in the right situation. So let's move on to the next group here, which is going to be the fairies, and more specifically really the charmers, but this is mostly all the fairies in the meta. Florges being number one on the list of rankings now after that Fairy Wind update. Even though it's running a mono fairy moveset in the Sims, that Disarming Voice and Moonblast come out so quick and so fast that if it's not a steel type, it essentially has to fear Florges. So let's see, you know, the moveset has never been on Florges' side as far as whether or not it's been able to deal with steel types, because every move on its roster is not steel friendly, right? It's got Disarming Voice, Psychic, Moonblast, and Petal Blizzard. None of those can deal with a steel type enemy. Fairy Wind and Vine Whip have always been its, you know, its fast moves of choice here, especially Fairy Wind now that it's got the buff, but it used to be Vine Whip. But you know, it beats basically every dragon because it's got such a fast charge move in the fairy typing, and it really, like, all of the losses here are essentially things that are already anti-fairy, and Rhyperior is the only thing else that's not, and it's a really, really close matchup anyway. It can even beat Togekiss, but essentially if it can be beaten by a fairy, it basically is. This thing is going to be insane, and I fully expect other content creators to cover it. I won't, because I'm not building one. You can't make me. I don't have the dust for it anyway. I don't have the dust for anything. But Primarina is another new addition. We kind of had it last time we had Master League Premier Classic, but it was still sort of fresh and new, and it was still spicy. But essentially, it's a Pokemon that can either use Waterfall or Charm in its fast move. It's fairy type, and it is able to do absolutely nothing but nuke things. It has Moonblast, Hydro Pump, and Psychic, so if you're running Charm, it's going to take you 3 years to get to a move, but when you finally do, you'll get a shield for it. Quite similarly, we have Togekiss up here at number 7. Togekiss, we all know Togekiss, nothing's changed, but Togekiss has gotten a slight buff with the Ancient Power buff, so Ancient Power does do a bit more damage, so you just have to be wary of that. Doesn't have the ability to double boost anymore. Sylveon, though. Sylveon got Quick Attack, and Sylveon having Quick Attack means that it is a monster. Some of you are probably playing one in the Ultra Premier Cup right now and are noticing how good it is as something that can trap those poison types with the Psyshock damage. You can really pressure those Pokemon into forcing shields or switch with that, even though it's a fairy type. It's very, very good. In this Premier Master Classic League, there's not really very many poison types to trap per se, so your mileage will definitely vary on that one. You're probably still going to be better off running it. I mean, maybe you're better off running it with Charm. I still think the Quick Attack is good. I mean, Quick Attack on Victini is my experience, and it's been great. So like you could run it with, you know, the usual Moonblast and Psyshock. Quick Attack charges very quickly now. It's basically a Powder Snow clone if you're not aware yet. And so having that fast move, you can still farm down with Quick Attack, but having that charge move, you know, that efficient charge move, you know, charging fast move, I should say, it really helps Sylveon get to those charge moves and can really flip matchups in ways that Charm never could. Because, you know, if Psyshock is the move of choice, maybe you're against something that Psyshock would do better against than a Moonblast would. You know, being able to get to that quicker makes some of those matchups more impactful. So Quick Attack is just a more diverse tool in Sylveon's kit that it now has in order to make things a little bit more interesting. Gardevoir as the list of this Charmer that you're probably never going to see, but just be aware that it has Shadow Ball, it has Psychic, it has Synchronoise, it has, you know, it has some moves you need to be aware of, but essentially it's really, you're probably not going to see very many Gardevoirs. To be totally honest, there's not many people who would rather run Gardevoir over something like Sylveon or Togekiss, but Gardevoir is still a very hard-hitting, very potent Shadow Charmer. If there is someone who wants to run it, you can definitely get your mileage out of that thing, as you all know from the oh, what the heck was it? It was the Psychic Cup. That's what it was. That thing took over the meta because of just how oppressive it was, and it's no different in any other meta that it's in. It just needs the right setting and right team to really thrive. So next group up here is going to be the Waters / Ices / Steels. These basically like the anti-flyers and anti-steels, right? So it's like a mishmash of things here, but Walrein is still in the meta. It's not as good because it got that nerf to powders, or nerf to Icicle Spear, but it's still going to be good. It still has Earthquake, and that hasn't slowed down at all. So Walrein is still going to be something that you're going to see in this meta. Maybe not as much, but it's definitely something that's going to be worth noting and planning for. Swampert hasn't changed, going to be the same as it always has been. Excellent anti-steal, very spammy with those Hydro Cannons. Melodic, though, is a very interesting Pokemon that I would like to build someday. It has access to Waterfall, and it has access to that Dragon Tail, so both two really interesting and good fast moves for it. So Dragon Tail gets that energy a little bit quicker, and Waterfall is going to be able to do that stab water fast move damage, and it gets Surf, Blizzard, and Hyper Beam. So not only do you have a decent bait move in Surf, but you've got Blizzard and Hyper Beam for nukes. Like, you can't really go wrong there. Blizzard just, it hits like a truck, Hyper Beam hits like a truck, and Surf is good enough stab damage to put pressure on a lot of things. Mamoswine is a favorite of mine because I used to use it in Open Classic Master League, and it core breaks very well. Mamoswine having that ground ice typing and a moveset to match means that it can go toe-to-toe with, you know, well, obviously all the dragons because of the ice typing, but it means it can threaten shields and the health off of steel types like Metagross. And even though it's listed up there as a hard loss because Metagross probably gets to 2 Meteor Mashes in the one shield before that, the Mamoswine can get off 2 Bulldozes and then KO afterwards, because that definitely takes more than 1 Bulldoze to KO a Metagross. But it's a good core-breaking Pokemon, and if you've got one, you probably do. It's definitely going to have some use in this meta, especially when you've got things like Magnezone and Excadrill, those things that actually Mamoswine can tangle with. Very interesting, very potent moveset because it's got the Powder Snow Avalanche combo that we know from Frostlass, so that's going to be very useful. And the ground typing means that it can, like I said, it can handle the steel type, so it's a good, it's really good core breaking material. I recommend you try one out if you haven't already. It's a lot of fun, as I've used one in the past and had a lot of success with it. Excadrill, at this point, if you don't know Excadrill, I don't know what hole you've been living in, probably one not dug by an Excadrill, but Excadrill is essentially the king of this cup. It has the rock ground coverage and a spammy move set in Rock Slide and Drill Run with that Mud Shot fast move. Ever since it received that update, it's been very, very prevalent in the Master League Classic Premier. Able to basically handle everything that's not a water or fighter, so it has a very diverse and very good move set. It's consistent. The only problem that it has is that it's very frail compared to some other things, so kind of melts to things like Waterfall Gyarados and Haxorus and Champ and things like that. Magnezone is a good pick here because it can do all the things a Steel needs to do. And electric damage is always very underrated in metas because electric as a type is usually bad. The Pokemon are so attack weighted because of the fact that their their main stat or their main series stats usually translate over into an attack weighted Pokemon like you see here on Magnezone. But don't count Magnezone out because it doesn't have a lot of bulk. This thing is able to shield pressure like no other, even against something like a Metagross or Walrein, for example, is going to have a real tough problem with these things. So electric damage has always been like some of those things that kind of core breaks because not a lot of things really expect to have to deal with it, and it's one of those types that is only really resisted by just a few types. So Magnezone, again, if you have one built, going to be very useful in this cup, especially in a team. You could pair it with something like a Dragon for Dragon Steel combos. And Metagross is probably the one that everybody knows, everybody has. If you're competing in this cup, you've probably got or are prepared to deal with Metagross. It's not number one on the rankings, but honestly, it might as well be because it's the most consistent Pokemon in the entire league, has some of the strongest matchups, and has the best farm down potential. You put that thing against a Fairy, it comes out with 100 energy, and you basically win the game at that point. So enough of that though. Next page is going to be the fighters on the page here and the things with fighting coverage. So Machamp, we know what Machamp is, we know what Machamp does, but I want to talk about Sneasler because Sneasler is new and it's ranked number 12, and I want to make sure you're aware that in the Sims this thing is ranked number 12 because most of its wins are going to be based on it not tanking a nuke and getting to the close combat to KO something before the Pokemon can get to a second move because it baited with the X's successfully. Now, close combat on Sneasler is going to be strong enough to take out a lot of things. If you remember in the Fighting Cup, a close combat KO'd probably an entire 70+% of the meta in one shot. So this thing is super strong. However, it is very, very, very frail, paper thin, like Gengar levels of thin here. So you do have to play this thing with care, and obviously it's not going to be able to tangle with flying types very well, given that its moveset is X-Scissor and air and close combat. And there are also some things like Garchomp that, because it has that poison typing, those ground type attacks are not going to let it do very well. So you have to be very careful with your Sneasler if you're going to bring one into this league, but definitely not a bad pick amongst all these other fighters. Having an anti-fighting fighting type is really neat. Like Heracross, for example, as well. Heracross it has a good bait move and Rock Blast. That's what I was going for. It has Rock Blast, and it also has the ability to have close combat or Mega Horn or Earthquake. So there's a bunch of different moves for it. Usually you want to go with close combat though, and then it's basically like the other fighting types. Can't touch fairies. Flying types are a bit of a pain for it, but because it has Rock Blast, it is able to hit them back for at least reasonable damage. And then it does everything a fighter should do, and also can beat Swampert, I believe, because it resists the ground typing, so it only really has to deal with Hydro Cannons, which aren't that bad for it in the Master League, because Master League it's a bit bulkier for some of the stuff that hit that level 40. Also, stay hydrated, folks. You want to make sure you drink water. Alright, so the next fighter up on the list is Sirfetch'd, and I think Sirfetch'd is really interesting because it's got that Swiss Army knife kind of kit where you could be packing Night Slash, Leaf Blade for coverage. You could have Brave Bird, you could have close combat. It's got a lot of different moves that make it very viable. It's only got those 4 moves, but anyway, essentially the Sirfetch'd can have a wide round moves, and it's going to be able to let it pressure shields or really nuke things, because those stab close combats hurt so much. And the same thing goes for the Brave Birds even. Like if you're against something that's weak to flying type, by the way, it's instant KO. Conkeldurr is something that some people have used to great success. I don't have one built. I don't know if I ever will, because the fact that Master League Classic seems to be a thing that's going away. We'll find out, and seasons do. But basically, Conkeldurr has Dynamic Punch and Stone Edge and Counter. So it's got some reasonable bulk to it. It's got a good HP stat. Defense, not so great, but it's got a good attack stat. And this thing is going to have that rock fighting coverage that Machamp has, but with both nukes. So no matter what you're going to be, throwing at your opponent, it's probably going to get shields or something of the sort. So it's going to be a reasonably good thing to use, especially like on a safe swap sort of situation where you can get ahead on energy and get to one of those nukes before your opponent can take you out. Good situation for Conkeldurr to be in. Speaking of safe swaps, we've got Snorlax. Everybody knows about Snorlax. Snorlax is a mainstay of the meta. It has Lick, Body Slam, and a plethora of other charge moves that you'd like to run if you'd like. A Superpower, Earthquake, whatever you want to use. Obviously, it's always been used really as a safe swap or even a lead. Throw the Superpower and a bailout. But somewhat similar coverage to the Gengar. Gengar, again, has a toolkit sort of move set where it can have the Focus Blast as well as Sludge Bomb, Shadow Ball, and has the Shadow Punch for the bait move. So Gengar is super consistent and can do a lot of work in a meta like this. So it's worth checking out. If you've got one, maybe you have a Mega that's built up, it might be worth checking out and using. And this last page here is going to be some less meta, core-breaking kind of picks that we're going to talk about. And Obstagoon being one of them. If you've got, Walrein, or you've got, Obstagoon is kind of hit and miss, right? You got to be in the right, meta call, right? You've got to be able to talk to yourself and be like, hey, I'm going to run this Obstagoon. It sucks, but some people have run it to great success. If you're seeing a lot of things like Excadrill, Snorlax, Mamoswine, Magnezone, Steels, and the normal types and things like that, even ghost types like Chandelure or Gengar, then your Obstagoon's going to have a good time. But if you're currently sitting in a saturated meta full of Metagross, which, Metagross doesn't do great, I think, against Obstagoon and the two shields, but, Gyarados, Dragonite, Garchomp, those are things that really can easily deal with an Obstagoon, so use that at your own risk. Electivire very similarly has a spicy side to it, has Ice Punch, has Wild Charge typically, and is just one of those things where it's like if the meta catches it right, this thing can just destroy people. Also, if it has shields, it can destroy people. Yeah, so Rosaraine's another one. If you see a lot of fairies, it's a good Poison Jabber, has the Weather Ball, has the Leaf Storm. It's a very good Pokemon in specific situations, similar to the next one up, Arcanine. Got that recent Psychic Fangs buff, so it's more of a sim hero than anything. But Arcanine did have some play in this meta prior to this season as well, so you might very well have, maybe your Fire Fang Arcanine, or, you Snarl, Wild Charge, and either Crunch or Psychic Fangs, either way. Arcanine could have some play here, and I love Arcanine. It would be kind of cool to, play when I have one. I have it best buddied, I think, so maybe someday. Other fire type here is Chandelure. Chandelure is super, super spicy, but also really, really powerful if you give it shields. At number 54, it gets Incinerate, Flame Charge, and Shadow Ball. So similar to Talonflame, you've got a Flame Charge Incinerate user with a nuke move that is stab typing, meaning that Chandelure could absolutely go off and sweep a whole team if they're not ready for it. So make sure you're ready for it. Speaking of things that could sweep a whole team that's not prepared for it, Tyranitar having Smackdown and or Bite with that Stone Edge Crunch moveset is going to be very good if you end up, again, in the right meta. These are all things that have to be used in the right meta. But Tyranitar's main wins here, especially as a Shadow. The good thing, it beats Espeon. I love Espeon, but that thing's not going to be in this meta. You're not going to see it, so don't worry about that. But things like Gyarados, Dragonite, it's going to be able to beat those. But you come up against something like a Metagross, a Fairy type, Magnezone, Steel types, or even Snorlax with that superpower. Like, there are things that it absolutely gets destroyed by. So keep that in mind if you do bring one. But once again, anything in the right team and in the right meta will do well. Avalugg is a new-ish edition, it has a really interesting moveset: Ice Fang, Avalanche, and Body Slam. So it has Stab Nuke, has Ice Fang, and it has Body Slam, which means it's actually really consistent damage if you can, you know, give it a good matchup and it's not being walled by something. And even then, the things that it, you know, gets walled by, like Metagross and Champ, are probably the things that wall it the hardest. Magnezone, obviously. Any steel type that doesn't care about taking some sort of ice damage. So, you know, Excadrill takes neutral damage because of that ground typing, so that's not going to be as great of a matchup for the Excadrill. But it completely shreds the dragons. Even Togekiss. Gyarados and Swampert don't like dealing with it either. So, I mean, this thing has play. I've seen it. It has play. And similar to Avalugg, Hippowdon has the Fang moves as well. It has Ice Fang in this meta because Ice Fang, I guess, is probably just the move of choice here. But you can use Rock, Weather Ball, and Earth Power on this thing, and that gives it a very solid, like, anti-dragon but also anti-steel move set. The problem with the Fangs is that they take so long to get to charge moves that you're probably not going to get to very many of them, so you have to play with care. But that's essentially the entirety of the meta that you're going to see. We'll talk about a couple of cores here. So there's the Dragonite Anti-Charmer core, so you're essentially either going to have Dragonite with steel types or maybe Dragonite with Gengar, like a poison type. Either way you could go, you could do well. You know, Chandelure would also fill the role of anti-charm, wall rain, things like that. But the Togekiss steel core, so the Togekiss and Excadrill core is also really strong because Excadrill easily handles all the steel types that give the Togekiss trouble and can also deal with the wall rain. However, this particular pair would probably have a hard time against something like Avalugg, or just it's a very good core, basically. Metagross and Haxorus are probably one of my favorite cores in this meta, one of the strongest in my opinion. They just cover each other so well, and it's such a good core, and I love it. And I have a video on it if you want to go back to the interlude season. I played a team with these two and it absolutely shredded, and I'll probably play it again. And then I was looking at Florges for a core, and I found that it actually cores extremely well with Swampert. So you could probably go with a Florges double ground sort of move here. You could probably do like an Excadrill Swampert or maybe Garchomp Swampert. Basically, just have two really solid answers to steal in the back, and you'll be solid with Florges. And in the middle, we've got our staple safe swaps of the meta. I put in Snorlax because it is literally safe swap incarnate. Gyarados able to have a moveset that can be consistent. So if it's not, even if it's like countered by something, it still has the ability to put out a lot of damage. And Lord forbid your opponent swaps into Togekiss to your Waterfall Gyarados, you actually laugh at them as you win that matchup. So Surfetched I threw in here because it has that, like we said, that toolkit sort of move set where it doesn't, you know, it's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get, right? It could be anything. You could be dealing with Close Combat, Brave Bird, Night Slash, Leaf Blade, who knows? But the Surfetch'd knows. And then Garchomp I like here because it's a good safe swap for dragons. If your opponent isn't packing a fairy, this thing can 2-shield through almost anything and when you switch, so it's very potent. And that's the Master League Premier Classic. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you are interested in teams and improving at GBL, I have a patron Discord with a community that is growing. It's a wonderful place to be. There's a link in the description to the patron page. Check it out if you want. I would love to see you there, help you get better at, you know, basically reaching your goals in GBL. And I also offer coaching for that same end. If you're not, you know, you don't want to deal with the patron subscription, you don't want to do the commitment sort of thing, that's all good. We have coaching in the description as well. Metafy link there, you can click that. I offer plenty of different courses, classes, and options if somebody would like to book me and, you know, just get a feel for checking out how I can help you improve. So that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm going to catch you in the next video. Bye-bye.